Mestizo. And please make sure to let us know if you're unable to do so in the chat, and we will gladly provide any more steps. But before we get started, before we introduce our moderator, I wanted to introduce Ariana Hun. Ariana Hun is someone who we've collaborated with a lot lately. She is a professor at CSUSB. And it's someone who really started, before I read her bio, I just wanted to say that really started this work with something that she did a few years ago, and we were very interested on how she started to talk about getting educators to get connected on resources for to discuss and to center Afro-Latinidad. And when we got to meet Ariana, we saw that there was a kindred spirit in ensuring that Blackness is centered, and that Blackness is always discussed, especially when it comes to Afro-Latinos, especially when it comes to Afro-Latinos in Los Angeles. Ariana Hun is a sociocultural anthropologist with training in both African studies and museum studies. Her research on Africa has centered on Lake Malawi corridor, and specifically the Mozambican shore of Lake Nyasa, where she has focused on food waste, spirituality, and medicine to understand how the local population conceptualizes what food is and what it does to the body. And that was published in Nourishing Life, the dietary ethnography of an African town, by Berger and Books. She's also conducted fieldwork in Ghana, and has done a lot of work in South Africa. She's also the director of the CSUSB Anthropology Museum, where she has developed exhibits and has maintained a collection of over 500 objects to develop, and has developed many community partners, where she has supervised internships and is working and has kicked off this new initiative called Afrontalo, a new exhibit that's part of the CSUSB Anthropology Museum. So before I keep messing up some of her bio, I'm going to allow Ariana to speak for herself and give us some opening remarks. Ariana.
Thank you so much, Josue, and hello to everyone, and welcome again to Enshrining Blackness, Afro-Latinidad, and the K-12 curriculum. My name is Ariana Hune. I'm the director of the Anthropology Museum and an associate professor of anthropology at Cal State San Bernardino, where we have just last month opened an exhibition called Afrontalo, which centers on the cultures, the histories, and the identities of 4 Afro-Mexican communities and 21 Afro-Latina Californians, all in their own words. The exhibition is open through June 2024, and I hope that those of you in Southern California will make a trip out to see the show. But museums can no longer trust that placing information and objects and art in a room is enough. Museums in the 21st century recognize that public programming is required to extend the messaging, the learning opportunities, and the resources of museums beyond our gallery walls and into our communities and across the nation and across the world. So it's for this reason that the Anthropology Museum, with support from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, is very happy to partner with Afro-Latino Forum to bring you today's event, where we'll hear from leading experts across the nation who are doing the work on the ground and in the classroom to not only incorporate Afro-Latinidad in K-12 classrooms, but to infuse the K-12 curriculum. This is critical work to combat anti-Blackness, to distinguish Latino, Latina, Latinx, Latine as a rainbow rather than a singular and monotone population, to expand U.S. school children's understanding of the transatlantic slave trade to more than just the U.S. South, and equally important, to include Black stories, Black identities, and Black experiences beyond the fetishized spectacle of Black pain, to showcase Black joy, Black creativity, Black resilience, and Black community. Individual educators and consultants and administrators have been doing this work to enshrine Blackness and Afro-Latinidad in the K-12 classroom. But what happens when we bring everyone into one space and we begin working together in sharing resources and developing resources, and maybe even setting a common agenda? In May of 2022, as Josue remarked, as part of our preparatory work for the current Afrontalo exhibition, the Anthropology Museum held a hybrid and bilingual summit to discuss Afro-Latinidad in K-12 education. 150 people attended in 9 different countries. And it was here that we began to see clamoring for more information and more attention and more events that center Afro-Latinidad. In a post-event survey, 97% of our respondents said that they left encouraged to learn more about Afro-Latinidad and that the event deepened their ability to support diversity, equity, and inclusion in their schools. I imagine similar results today, and the expansion of a nascent network that is committed to recognizing and combating the erasure of Afro-Latines from discussions of Latin America and its diasporas, and the African diaspora as well. With that, let me pass back over to Josue Perea, Executive Director of Afro-Latino Forum.
Thank you so much, Ariana. I think you're saying the right things that we need to say. And just a reminder to all presenters as we speak, just make sure that we take a little bit longer to allow our interpreter time to catch up. So as she tries to catch up to all of our words. No, it's okay, Ariana. She just said, Michelle, just remind everyone. So as just one more reminder before I introduce our panelists. Well, before I introduce our moderator, who will then introduce all our panelists. If you are interested in listening to this conversation in Spanish, you can just go to the bottom of the menu. There's a globe there that says interpretation, where you will be able to then select Spanish and listen to it in Spanish. Si usted quiere escuchar esta reunión en español, tenemos interpretación. Solo tiene que oprimir el globo que dice interpretación abajo en el menú y ahí va a poder tener esa opción. And I'm excited to see La Doctora Evelyn Loren Peralt joining us in this conversation. Such a wonderful elder from our movement. But without further ado, I want to introduce Manuel Mendez. Manuel Mendez will be moderating today's discussion. Manuel Mendez is a University of Maryland PhD student at the College of Information Studies, whose scholarship focuses on Afro-Latino history in the DC metropolitan region, otherwise known as the DMV. He's a documentary producer and archival activist. Manuel is a frequent invited panelist and speaker on Latino identity, Black cultural memory and heritage, and anti-Black racial oppression among Spanish-speaking and/or white supremacist communities. Manuel's scholarship draws from his extensive experience with youth organizing, bilingual public library service, and grassroots oral history work. His work has been recognized and utilized by Politics and Prose, O La Cultura, Univision, the Office of the DC Mayor, and various universities across the US. So without further ado, let's introduce Manuel Mendez. Manuel.
Saludos a todos y bienvenidos a este forum. Thank you for being here. Afro-Latino, Afro-Descendants make up more than a quarter of the Latin American population in this diaspora. And yet the representation of Latinidad is overwhelmingly mestizo. Can K-12 classrooms be used to expand understanding of the African diaspora and to combat anti-Blackness through lesson plans and curriculum that centers on Afro-Latines? What is the difference between representation and infusion, and why does it matter? And how do we start this process? Join us for the panel discussions with educators, consultants, and public humanities scholars who are tackling these difficult questions, creating resources, curating communities, and enshrining Blackness across subjects and grade levels. And now I will introduce our fabulous panelists. Iscari Esteli is a South Central Los Angeles born and raised Black queer diasporani. They are an educator, writer, researcher, and community care worker. They hold a BA in English from the University of Los Angeles and an MA in English from the University of California, Riverside. Iscari academic and curatorial work is on hemispheric kinship, on Black queer performance art practices across lives and digital mediums. They have a particular focus on Black American and Black Latinx trans femme artists. They have 7 years experience proofreading and copy editing diverse materials, collaborating, developing, and presenting classroom content designing social justice-oriented community experiences, and otherwise working with learners. Scotty is especially passionate about increasing accessibility, cultural relevance, and baselines of care that make up every space they are in, from their curated events to their home spice cabinet. Scotty facilitates a cohort of teachers working to infuse K-12 curriculum with Afro-Latinidad through Cal State San Bernardino Afro-Latinismo initiative, supported by the Department of Ethnic Studies. Dr. William Garcia Medina is currently a Charles Phillips Taft postdoctoral fellow at the University of Cincinnati. His research focused on Black diasporic public humanities, Afro-Latinx education, cultural studies, and museum studies. Garcia Medina has provided educational consulting, training, workshops for numerous organizations, universities, school districts, and museums. He has taught courses in Latino studies, American studies, and Black studies, and has published in these fields in academic journals, blogs, and podcasts. Garcia Medina has contributed to Latino Rebels since 2015, and has been a guest on national broadcast radio such as Latino USA and NPR. He tweets from at Afro-Latino Ed. Jennifer White is a native from the Dominican Republic who is currently residing in Anniston, Alabama. She is a Spanish teacher, a mother of 5, a podcaster of Afro-Latina teacher in the rural South, blogger, and a Zumba instructor. She's a national presenter to teachers all over the United States. She's on the American Council for Teachers of Spanish and Portuguese Board of Directors. She was the 2021 Alabama Teacher of the Year, the 2021 Southern Region Teacher of the Year, and a finalist for the 2022 National Teacher of the Year. Jennifer loves to travel with students and has attended several trips in the United States, Europe, the Caribbean, and Central America. Yusef Medina served as the Director of Community Initiative at Virginia Humanities, the State Humanities Council headquarters at University of Virginia in Charleston, Virginia. In his role, Mr. Medina provides leadership, expertise, in broadening and strengthening community partnerships statewide. Mr. Medina leads the Virginia HBCU Scholar Fellowship, the Virginia African American Cultural Resource Task Force, and works across the organization to co-design and develop educational content. Prior to his current role, Mr. Medina works with youth and families in K-12 public school system, as well as juvenile justice system as an education and re-entry program specialist in Harlem, New York. In addition to his work at Virginia Humanities, Mr. Medina serves on the board of the director of Canary Academy Online, the Afro-Latino Forum, as chair of the Education and Career Training Committee for Virginia Latino Advisory Board, and is also visiting scholar at the Center for Minority Serving Institution in the Graduate School of Education at Rutgers University. These are all great panelists, and I would love to thank everybody for being here, to all the panelists, all the folks that are attending today. And so to begin, I wanted to ask everyone a question about the challenges or challenging dominant norms. So what steps can we take to question and challenge the dominant norms and perspective within the Black community and Latino community? And I think anyone can take this one if they want. Pero bienvenidos y gracias. Super excited to be here with all you guys. So gracias. Anybody want to take a hack at, the ways we challenge norms within K-12? And I guess you can unmute yourself if you like.
Well, I can start. I was a McDermott intern for the School and Youth program. I was a McDermott intern for School and Youth program at the Dallas Museum of Art, and it was a great experience in the midst of COVID. So I had to get very creative with things I did there. One of the things I did was I walked around the exhibit. It was on Mexican history, and I saw a lot of European, Native stories. I didn't see any Black history. It's like, where's the third root? Where's the Black history at? So when we met with the Racial Equity Office with DISD, I said, no, I think we should do an Afro-Mexican, curriculum that doesn't exclude Black American history in Texas, and everybody loved it. And so we were able to develop some lesson plans. When I looked at the lesson plan, the national standards for Latino history and Black history in Texas, they both had, layers of slavery and resistance. So I said, right there, we're gonna work with that right there. And so we did a little bit of that. We started talking about slave resistance with Yanga in Mexico. And for chapter 2, we talked about William Henry Ellis, who was a man who went to Mexico and changed his name to Guillermo Eliseo and grew a mustache and made it big in Mexico. And we also we started to talk about the Underground Railroad to Mexico instead of just to Canada, right? To kind of create those stories. And then I think we made a social story where we started emphasizing, famous folks who were did a lot of social movements in the 70s and 80s. So I think for me, what I would recommend is trying to look at the national standards, really play the game in the system and try to figure out where are those layers, where are those connections. We say Spanish, los entrecruces, right? And so that's something that I think goes really well with different kind of educators. It brings more folks to the table. I have more examples, but I will let other folks talk.
Hey everybody, Jennifer. Sorry, Manuel. I wanted to share an experience I had when I went to the National World Language Teacher Conference for the first time. I was looking in the program and I was looking for anything related to Afrocentric or anything to help our Black students, African American students, and I only found one. So I attended that one, and it was a really tiny room. And it was packed. I mean, it could have been like 200 people in this tiny room. We couldn't fit. And when I looked around, the majority of the people in there were white folks. They were just like, they need to know more. And they didn't know these are all teachers. And these are teachers from Texas, all over the United States, where there is a great minority of students that they teach. And when I looked around, I said, what's the deal? I was really upset because I was like, why is this the only session that we have? So I proceeded with writing a letter afterwards. Wrote a letter to the main organization just saying, why is this happening? And what they said was simple. Why don't you write a proposal? Why don't you start something? And then I didn't know it was that easy. So sometimes challenging the norm means you got to put yourself out there. You got to write a letter. You got to talk to somebody, anybody. I spoke to whoever, and they said, write a proposal. When I got accepted the following year, we were in, I think, New Orleans, and they gave me a humongous room, and it was full. And I was so pleased that they were able to listen to my voice. After that, this was like about 8 years ago, in the world language community, I started seeing more people of color, more Afro-Latinos, more African Americans just presenting about Afro-Latino, Afro-Latinidad. And it was wonderful because we need to reach those students. So I thought that this was a good example of challenging the norm.
I'll jump in. Pleasure to be here with everybody. Those are both great examples. I'll say in terms of challenging the dominant norms and perspectives within each community, Black and Latino, or Latine. I think that a lot of times Black and Latine faculty or teachers or staff or what have you are already assumed to have knowledge of our history and culture. And because we're oftentimes overworked, we hear this saying of minority tax, where we're asked to pick up, extra tasks and duties to help keep things flowing in whatever system that we're in, whether it's K-12, whether it's higher ed. A lot of times we don't, maybe it's due to lack of time and resources, but it's also due to maybe this preconceived notion that we already have an understanding of familiarity of our own culture. And I think we need to be in conversation with one another to say, to have these conversations and to challenge, as the question states, these dominant perspectives, because I think a lot of times once you start those conversations, people come to realize, oh, I didn't realize that, I didn't know this, or I didn't know that. So I think it starts there, and I think we also have to bring the youth into more conversations that are happening about them. A lot of times we talk about them and the curriculum and the things that go out to them, but we don't include them in those conversations. And I think in doing so, we can have a fresh perspective on how to tackle some of these issues as well. Because I think sometimes our approach is antiquated too. We're dealing, we're kicking, history and knowledge that's somewhat dated a lot of times in these curriculums, and it's not, or in the curricula, and it's not current to necessarily the issues and the perspectives that the youth have right now in 2023, 2024.
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for having me, y'all. I'm so excited to be on this panel with y'all. And to have all y'all in the audience in this conversation. So to go off on that point, I think there are two things that I was thinking about. And one is like being really clear, forward, and working with your positionality, right? Whether that is I am Afro-Latina or I'm not, and I have Latinidad or I have Blackness as an experience, one or the other, or both or none, right? Like, what does that give you the knowledge of, and what does that leave you with gaps of, and how can that be an honest conversation that can happen in the classroom? That can mean that students can also come with their full authentic knowledges and gaps, and really work through that together, because I think that's sort of how the knowledge stays up to date too, right? With thinking about how the youth have knowledge that continues to grow from what we've had and what we have now. Is like, okay, so I value your knowledge. I value your experience. I value the things that you might not even know that you know yet, but you have, and you just might not have the language for yet or whatever. And really like having that be a consistent part of pedagogy. And I think a lot about pedagogy in this way. And so I think, especially when we're thinking about challenging these things, and this is a question I know, or like a topic that we're going to get to more a little bit, but to go beyond just like, this is an Afro-Latino that you should know. Let's place them in the current curriculum, and the representationality of that is like really interrogating sort of like where the places that you come from are, where the knowledges that you have come from, and then sharing those things and getting into like the community that we also have around us, and how they have knowledges and the ways of knowing that can always begin at very base levels to challenge norms. And yeah, I think, yeah, that's a big part of it.
you make a great point, because most of the time, and I don't want to interject, I just want to ask questions. Most of the time, we only see a couple of Afro-Latinos, like Celia Cruz. We only see Roberto Clemente, but our communities are full of examples of people who deserve to be acknowledged too. And so hopefully different curriculums and different educators move in that realm where they can acknowledge the benefit that community members bring to the schools as well. Pero vamos a movernos porque no, I don't want to interject. How can we expand and diversify educators' understanding of Latinidad, uno, dos, Blackness, and three, culturally relevant materials? Anyone want to take that?
Well, I'm a high school teacher. I teach middle school and I teach elementary all at once. I work in an independent school, so that's why I have to have a lot of hats. And in where I live, it's like I'm the resource. There's no Afro-Latinos here. Me and my husband are it. He's from Panama and I'm from the Dominican Republic. And I feel like we carry the weight of educating everybody around here. But we enjoy it. So we've learned to enjoy it. And one thing that I have loved to do, and I suggested it to my administration, was celebrating Black History Month. That's not something that schools around here do. They don't just have a Black History program. As you know, I grew up in Miami. We have it all the time, or New York, but not here. You have to be a teacher that's willing to give up your time to do it. So I incorporated an event where I asked the HBCUs to come in and teach step dance to my student body, which is majority white kids. And the way I introduced it in my Spanish classroom was talking about el zapateo and the history of the Afro-Mexicanos and how the zapateo, is over there too, So we started with zapateo, we watched YouTube videos, all kinds of stuff. And then we had the African Americans come in and they taught the actual step dance. Now, for my students, I was kind of scared because I was the first person to bring something in like this, but they were so excited for them to open their eyes and say, oh, we know this, we got this. We already learned about zapateo, so we can take step, even though they didn't know what step dance was. They didn't know that sororities and fraternities did it all the time. It was so nice to be able to open up Afro-Latinidad and Latinidad all together in one during Black History Month. Even though I do it year round, I don't believe in just 1 month, but because it's accepted here once a month, then I go ahead and I just bombard. I bombard it with as much as I can. And just to open up the taste buds or the interest buds of these students, these youth that have no clue what is Afro-Latinidad, what is Latinidad at all.
Yeah, that's great, Jennifer. I was gonna say, I think one of the problems is that each community sees themselves as different from the other, and we're not having the conversation in global context. And so, if we look at the Middle Passage, the Ma'afa, what have you, and the millions of people that were, transported to the Americas, I mean, we know it was upwards of 90% came to Latin America, but that history isn't really told, and so a lot of times African Americans are viewing themselves in this silo, like they're the only ones that have went through, certain forms of oppression. But I think that when we have these conversations in a global context, we can show the intersectionality between the two communities, and talk about how we have more alike than we have dislike, how we have common ancestry. And this is why, you eat this and we eat that and what have you. And we can bring the conversations to a level of where our students are at, right? Where our families are at. But I think we have to root it in a much deeper history. And so, like, the example that you gave is so great, because I know that's one of the things that I always used to do with my kids when I was in the juvenile facilities and in the classrooms. I would actually swap the months, because I would so in Latin American history, I would show, you know, the Black components in Latinidad, and then in Black History Month, I would show the Latinoisms within Blackness, you know. And so it's like, to get each community to buy into one another, you know, it takes these sort of courageous conversations to be had, and to showcase you know, so much of the common history. You know, the Underground Railroad went to Mexico too, you know. You know, and there's like so many touch points that we can talk about, you know, to bring our folks together. So yeah, I definitely just agree with what Jennifer said, but just adding to that, I think we need more of that, you know, throughout the country.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in and say that, you know, I taught high school last year. I was in Newark, New Jersey, and that's remember when I started talking Spanish. It was like, "Oh, you speak Spanish?" It's like, "Yeah, yeah." I'm sure we all get that. Like, "Do you? Oh, I didn't know you spoke Spanish." Kind of comment from students, you know, Newark, and they're like, "Where are you from?" Like, "I'm from the Caribbean." I don't really, you know, I just say I'm from the Caribbean. But I do want to give us a shout out for that, because the catch up, we always have to catch everyone up, and I think there's a lot of, you know, you get exhausted from doing that, you know, and so I think, like Jennifer was saying, that what Jose was saying, and everyone was saying, that we are often the only one, you know, and I'm in Cincinnati right now, and I'm trying to do some Afro-Latinx stuff here, and everyone's like, you know, it's like, let's see who's gonna wanna be in Cincinnati, where it's very Black, white, you know. But yeah, I agree with what everyone's saying. I just want to say that, you know, it depends on where people are at. So that thing which Jose was saying, I was in a summer camp in Trenton. I just finished my summer camp. I did it for 2 years. A great experience. And we were doing a get together, and I was in like a Black get together. Most staff are Black, you know. And I was trying to bring flan, and my good friend was like, "Don't bring no flan here. Don't bring that here." He didn't really understand that this is Blackest thing you can bring to here. But and I remember we were playing radio once. I was trying to play some salsa. He's like, "Don't bring that Spanish stuff here." I'm like, trying to. I think it's important for us to understand that even with social media, even with all the stuff, some folks really, you know, we got to be very patient with. And that's a good friend that you know, but I had to kind of, you know, talk to him a little bit about the story, and a little bit of this and that. So in my classrooms too, like I usually often include the history of Blackface in Latin America. I talk about, you know, a lot of the stories of activism, but I agree with what Yahusef was saying, that in our communities, we kind of see ourselves as separate. And that's why we have to propose a transnational, you know, transnational Blackness, right? Thinking about the hemispheric kinship, the term I love, it's a really interesting term, but transnational Blackness is how I usually talk to people. It is my go-to, because then I'll talk to people like the person I was mentioning. I'll say, you know, did you know that, you know, the Harlem Hellfighters? Yeah. Did you know a lot of them were Puerto Rican? Oh, I didn't know that. Because a lot of folks want to see themselves in the story. And so what I do is I really do start with stories that can combine their stories with the other story. So when someone's talking about Harriet Tubman, I thought, "Oh, do you know who Carlota is in Cuba?" It's her and the sister. She did a, you know, Flavor of All. There was contemporaries. Oh, okay, I didn't know that. So I try. I'm not saying I have to do that, but I do like to talk about examples like blackface. Anyone can understand that. Examples that allows them to understand these things, because I have to. The older I get, the more I realize that a lot of folks may not really, you know what I'm saying, understand the stories. And by connecting those stories with their stories, it creates a transnational focus. So using transnationalism as a category of analysis and a category of unity is really the go-to. And this is why we did those lesson plans. I know we're going to talk about later, but that's, for me, is really important, because but the problem is, if you say Puerto Rican is Puerto Rican history is Black history, or Black history is American history, that's fine. You can do that. Or Panamanian history is Black history. Just understand, because of the nation state, you will be excluding folks. So if someone says Black history is Puerto Rican history, I will tell them, what about the Caribbean migrations to Puerto Rico? What about Black Dominican history in Puerto Rico? Because if that's not included, then that's not an inclusive account of Black history of that region. So I would do that in the United States. I would do that everywhere. So just understanding that we should never reduce Black history to the nation state. You know, it's always about the transnational Blackness, right? And I usually try to talk about, oh, did you know a lot of Black Cubans went to Booker T. Washington's Tuskegee School? Oh, I didn't know that. So I try to really throw in the stories that they're able to understand. I know that, and I use flavor vaults, you know, I'll use this and that, and I'm really trying to make those connections. So that's kind of my approach to my classroom, to when I talk to folks in one-on-one. And I do push a little, but I try to push in ways that garner some attention and some feedback. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, having this transnational and like hemispheric, especially like perspective continually is something that I think is always missing, and is like feels like the thing in a lot of ways, and also continues to fuel the ways that it's perceived that Black communities as separate from Latino communities have so much animosity between them, right? When really we know that historically there's so many legacies of cooperation toward liberation, right? And we also know that it's important to decouple the way that Black has been made into beyond the borders of the US, or beyond the borders of Black Americans, Black US descendants of enslavement, really, that it has become like Black is only a word that's reserved for Black descendants of enslavement, right? In the US specifically. And then the way Latinidad has been made into this thing that's like, oh, Latinidad and mestizaje are the same thing, right? And it's like, no, those are not the same thing. Being mestizo is a very specific like racial and ethnic positionality that is not the same thing as being Latino, right? And so I think moving through those things by being specific about what everyone else brought up, because I want to just like shout out that's like, yes, all the things, is what's really important here, right? And then I think in terms of thinking about culturally relevant materials, I'm gonna, again, like, this might be the thing that I'm harping on this whole time, but like, what are the things that the students already have that are culturally relevant, that they are learning through and from, and the ways that they are learning through and from their communities can be brought into the classroom and then expanded upon. Those are the things that I think are missing. And it feels like, oh no, a teacher has to develop or go find things and bring it to their students who are these little piggy banks, right? And Paulo Freire already talked about this with banking, right? But like, they're not these little receptacles that don't have anything to offer, right? They already come with culturally relevant knowledges and materials that can then be further blossomed in the classroom. And I think that's really important.
Fire. That's a lot of fire. I was also thinking, and maybe we can park this, is the coastal coastal Afro-Latinidad. So for example, LA versus a Southern Afro-Latinidad versus the East Coast Afro-Latinidad, and different implications of how we feel Afro-Latinidad is to us. Because I think that's a good discussion to have. Pero no vamos a hablar de eso porque quiero continuar.
And on that also, just really quick, like also what happens to the middle of the country? Like there are Afro-Latinos
exactly.
all over the country. Like
Midwest have plenty of Afro-Latinos. Pero no quiero, quiero seguir con la pregunta. Sí. The next question is, what was the process, logic, intention in creating this Afro-Latino curriculum? And Yusuf, Dr. Williams, and Jennifer, if you would like to take a hack at that, like the intentionality of doing the Afro-Latino curriculum.
Sure. So just to give some context, the Afro-Latino Forum recently produced a 12-unit curriculum for the New York City Department of Education under an initiative that they had called Hidden Voices, where they were seeking to sort of bring greater representation to historically underrepresented or marginalized, communities. So they had an LGBTQ curriculum. They had, forgive me, they had an Asian American Pacific Islander curriculum, of course, and then they had the Afro-Latino curriculum. There may have been several others too. I feel like there was a Native American one that they did, a section that they did, and then something that pertained to African American history as well. But they have reached out to us to do the Afro-Latino component, which was I'll say a full circle moment for me. I'm really glad that Josue sort of dispatched me to that effort, because having grown up in New York and been a product of the public school system, I know that a lot of our history wasn't really taught in schools. I learned a lot about these monumental figures post my K-12 experience, or I learned about them outside of the classroom. I learned about them in my neighborhood. I learned about them, even in reference to certain music that I was listening to or what have you, more so than was actually taught to me in the classroom. And so, with New York being such a you could really call it the Mecca of Afro-Latinidad in the United States. If we go back to the history, and there's just a straight continuum that you have of Afro-Latino representation all the way through, at least starting in the mid to late 1800s to present day. Very strong communities between African Americans and our Latin American brothers and sisters, specifically the Caribbean component. And for that history to not be represented, in the school system is just really a disservice. So we really wanted to make sure that we captured, as much of that history as we could. Of course, we maximized our platform. They gave us 12 units. We did all 12 units. And we probably could have got about 24 in there. I know William was working on a few as well, and so we had a good time. I want to thank our colleagues that worked on that, and I'll shout them out here. But of course, Dr. William Garcia Medina, Dr. Anita Nadal, Dr. Alexa Rodriguez. Let me see, and forgive me if I'm missing any names. I should have written them down prior to this conversation. But we had so many different collaborators on this project, and we tried to get a full spectrum and equal representation of the history that exists in New York. And I'll just be a few more moments. I just wanted to sort of give some insight into the project that we did. But we started with, and I'll let William get into it in a minute, because he actually did the lesson on Juan Rodriguez, who we know was a Afro-Dominican, first Afro-Latino settler that we know of in the U.S., came to New York City, in the 1600s, actually predating English, arrival and what have you. This is when it was New Amsterdam and things like that. So there's just so much history. So we took it from there. Then we jumped to, the Afro-Cuban and Puerto Rican revolutionary movements that took place, in the late 1800s, where we see figures like Rafael Serra, like we see, Sotero Figueroa, Arturo Schomburg, and then, we move forward to sort of the experience that the interwar period, right, where we see the American conquest of Cuba and Puerto Rico, and then we start to see more of this Puerto Rican migration, Afro-Puerto Ricans coming to New York City, and we see folks like Jesus Colon and Bidi Tomas and these different, figures starting to arrive. So we did character studies. Then we take it into the civil rights movement, where, of course, we see many Afro-Latinos playing a very strong role in that movement. I think people, of course, we immediately jump to the Young Lords, but I think people need to understand that there were also Latinos that were Black Panthers, right? That were involved in the movement before the Young Lords even started. And so we have that history as well. And then we move into hip hop, and the different music genres, right, that were created through this sort of coalition between Black and Latino people, right? And then we move into the modern time frame, and sort of we touched a little bit on futurisms and Afro-Latinidad and art and things like that. Some really cool stuff that's taking place. And I think we had to keep it germane to New York because it's the New York City Department of Education. So we really focused heavily on the history that exists within the 5 boroughs. But of course, some of that reached out to the national arena as well. And it was great. And I think the timing was phenomenal too, because we're seeing this sort of we got Hip Hop 50 that's going on. We got so many different relative cultural movements that are taking place right now. And so I think it was just a phenomenal opportunity. And forgive me, I'm losing track of the question, but you said the logic and the intention. The intention behind it was to make sure that we actually infused our stories in the curriculum, opposed to just creating representation, right? It's okay to name drop folks, and I guess that's a start, but it's important that we have a mainstay and what our students are learning, because it's not sufficient enough for just Latino kids to know this history, but African American kids need to know this history. White kids need to know this history. Jewish, Middle Eastern, wherever you come from, this history is relevant because at this point it's American history as well. There's intersectionality with everything. And so our hope is that this will create some more cohesion between the communities, because even though that exists at a high level in New York, there's still a lot of ignorance between, the African American and Latin American communities, on the history that does exist, and I think that conversation needs to be had more in depth. And hopefully this curriculum is a start. And so we hope to do some professional development trainings around that as well. So we're thankful to the New York City Department of Education. And I'll pass it. Sorry for taking so much time.
Yeah, no, I just want to thank, Jose for getting me to it. I do want to say that we're, because we're right now, white racial domination is trying to do away with Black history altogether. It forces folks to be in the front lines, right? And it kind of forces folks to reinforce their relationship to how they want to understand themselves and other Black folks with being in the front lines at all times. And so what's going to happen is the folks are going to try to preserve what they already know. And so they're going to say they're going to preserve whatever they think is going to help them preserve the front lines, right? For all of us in our communities, right? And so I think one of the biggest issues right now is trying to come to terms with the reality that a lot of the continental United States and its relationship to Black history stems beyond the British dimension, right? And it includes the Dutch, the French, the Spanish Empire, and those empires are layered and created nested colonialisms. And so that's why I proposed Juan Rodriguez, and I said, we often, and we start Afro-Latino history with Schomburg in the 1800s. I said, because Juan Rodriguez is such an important story, we need to go back, because in doing so, it kind of forces all of us to understand the importance of Black history in Florida in the 1500s. So, you can't just start Black history in Florida in the 1820s when the United States invades and becomes a U.S. state. that you can't do that because you're ignoring hundreds of years of Black history. So, and we have to find a way to include many dates and many, many linkages in ways that defies the linearity of 1607 Jamestown, Virginia, the forced founding of the United States. And so when you introduce someone like Juan Rodriguez, right, who half Portuguese, half, Dominican, it goes in, who was a linguist, someone who's incredibly talented, who gets recruited by a Dutch sailor and marries with native folks, learns the Algonquin language, knows how to speak Lenape, is someone who's incredibly talented and has this kind of other fur trader who got mad, basically got salty that he had so much sway with the native folks, started accusing him of basically creating, some kind of inside connection. And so it created all this kind of resentment from other Dutch traders. It really tells us a history of resistance, the history of that Black history of Black Afro-Indigenous stories that I ignored in the United States and I ignored in Latinx histories. And so Afro-Indigeneity is a really serious thing, right? It really forces us to consider what was the Carib Wars, right? And St. Vincent, how the Black Indigenous folks resisted the British, especially in the Second War in the Caribbean, that these folks beat the British. And we can see that again in New York City, in New Amsterdam. It's not Manhattan. It's not New York City yet, right? It's just New Amsterdam. But in that story, there's all this Black story that's a beautiful story because then you have Juan Rodriguez who's stationed in a ship, and all this beautiful story that I would love to see a whole show of because there's something there, right? That of this Black man who basically making all these Dutch folks jealous that he has this sway, marries a native woman, creating all this story, and refuses to leave with his captain who recruited him, say, I'm going to stay here with my people. Such a beautiful story. And it's something that I proposed, and when Yahu said, let's do it, I said, let's do that. And I think it's a beautiful story that challenges all of us to, again, consider those transnational stories. And I was very excited to do that. And when Yahusef is talking about the interwar period, right? Interwar period is obviously between World War I and World War II, right? And we're talking about, and in my classrooms, I always make sure to talk about when the Ethiopian War beat the Italians, right? And my students were surprised that Rastafari literally means, right, Haile Selassie, and that Pan-Africanism and Ethiopianism is not just ideal. It's an actual war that the Ethiopians defeated the Italians. So I know that's a side comment, but I love teaching that every year to my students in Newark. They were like, really surprised at all that amazing story. But within that story, in New York City and the other part of the world, we have Black Cuban baseball players, right? We have the Cuban, we have the New York Cubans, right, who are in the Negro Leagues playing with Black folks, right? We know this, though. We know that there's this beautiful Negro League connection between different kind of Black folks. We have Silvio Garcia, Armando Vázquez, Minnie Miñoso, all these, and more importantly, we have a lot of Black American folks that played in Puerto Rico with the Santurce, los Cangrejeros de Santurce, right? It's such a, we got Willie Mays, Buster Clarkson, we have all these Black folks just moving around the islands. And again, this is why we have to challenge the nation state, right? Because Black folks are not allowed to play it in the actual major leagues, but Black American and all kind of Black folks are allowed to play in the Caribbean and play in things like the Cangrejero, which is a Black city in Puerto Rico. My dad's born. So it was just, I have to do it. We had to do a whole thing on New York Cubans. And again, it allows us to go and connect the Negro Leagues and Black Cubans. And within that, you can obviously throw more Black history and talk about, a lot of Afro-Cuban, Machito Cordero, with all these other folks, collaborate. You can throw a lot more in there. It's basically the floodgates that allows us to throw a lot more Black Cuban history, Black American, Afro-Cuban history, allows us to connect, Dizzy Gillespie with Machito, allows us to connect, all these other stories that are so important. Langston Hughes with all these Afro-Cuban poets, and the story goes on and on and on, right? And the 2-day ferry between New Orleans and Cuba, and we can, really go in there. And so the interwar period that allowed for Black agencies, Black folks to say, we're going to create our own stuff. And you saw the beauty of that Black collaboration that I was part of, but I'll just stop here because I'm very excited for that kind of story. But
I also
Thank you so
failed to
much. I
mention.
admire.
Oh,
Oh, sorry. Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
No,
I
you
just
go.
wanted to shout out one more of the specialists that worked on the curriculum. It was Denise Rivas. And forgive me if there was any other. As they come, I'll mention the names, but sorry.
Good. No, you're good. Thank you so much for sharing all that, because I'm looking at you guys like, dang, New York, you guys got it going on. I mean, that's where I migrated. I migrated from Dominican Republic to New York. So I was there for a little minute, but you know, coming to Alabama, that's not the perspective I have. I don't have all these Afro-Latinos here to draw from. But the way it started with me, the process actually was because first I had to recognize that I was Black. I didn't know I was Black. Grew up in Miami, Florida, between New York and then Miami. And in Miami, we didn't talk about it like that. Everybody in your family is different colors, so you don't say negro, ella es negra. You don't talk like that. Only Juan Liguera and his little song, I love Black people because they're gorgeous, they're beautiful. But when I came to Alabama, I saw Dr. Henry Louis Gates' documentary about Black in Latin America. You guys know about that? And the one about the grandma in the closet. And there was this young girl that said that he asked her, "Tú eres negra? Are you Black?" And the girl's like my complexion. And she said, "Sí." And I was like, "What?" And I mean, I'm telling you, that was my aha moment. I was like, wait, isn't she the same color I am now? I'm grown now with 5 kids, starting my career. This was like 10 years ago. And I'm like, wait a minute, if she's Black, then okay, why am I calling myself brown? Not that that's bad, but why am I sugarcoating it? I'm Black. Okay, so my process started there. Okay, I had to start there. Then I had to observe the colorism in Miami, like people talking about my hair. ¿Por qué no te alisas? Why don't you do this? Why don't you look like, I'm a pastor's wife. So it's like, why your hair so curly like that? Why you got to straighten your hair before you go preach with your husband or something. And it's like, then in Alabama, everyone's like, oh, I love your hair like that. Love your hair. So it's like, how is it that I'm more received in Alabama than in Miami? Okay. So I had to go through that. Then when I'm going through the resources that I'm going to teach Spanish now, there's nothing about Africa. There's nothing about our descendants, the music, everything we teach is like based off of Africa. It's like, what is this? Are we erased? I started doing these workshops about unbleach your curriculum, because I'm like, we got to unbleach it, because why did we bleach everything? Why is everything so white? Why are all the pictures white? And like, we were talking about representation. I know we're going to mention that a little bit later, but when I started doing that, I started just educating myself with attending more workshops. I went to, just watching things, meeting people. I had to take every unit in my book because I don't have a curriculum like New York. I don't have you guys that are so awesome. I had to take every unit in my book that's very white. So if I had a unit on art, for instance, and they have these particular artists, then I had to go deeper than just criticizing art and showing those art and showing, hey, there's an Afro-Latino artist. Like you said, Ixari, I can't just show a picture. I had to say, okay, so if that's an Afro-Latino artist, let's look at their background. Where do they live? Research where they live. What kind of struggles do they have? And remember, I'm not teaching Hispanics here. I'm not teaching a lot of African Americans. I'm teaching mostly white American kids that they wouldn't really care. Any kid wouldn't care unless you put it in their face and they need a grade for it. So now they care because they need a grade. So it's like, that's what I had to do as my process of my curriculum, is just infuse the Afro-Latinidad into my white book, my white textbook. And then I started just looking for books. And now it's great. Now there's more textbooks out there. There's Reporteros. Voces curriculum is what I use right now. The more I talk about Voces curriculum, the more they change. They change their curriculum. Now they have a different variety of people in their stories. Now we can talk about different topics. And then, the good thing about being a Spanish teacher is we could talk about anything in Spanish. And then if anybody walks in, we're just speaking Spanish, we're just, hey, ¿qué hace? Okay, and I get into these deep conversations with students, and they would actually tell me, no me dan permiso de estar con un negro. No me dan permiso tener amistad con una persona morena. And then it's like, oh gosh, why are we going into this? I'm not supposed to be talking about this. Then I get into that little fear factor of, I'm in a state where critical race theory is out the door. So I got to be careful with that. But if I can just focus on unity and love and acceptance, I think I'm okay. You know, I just had to form a relationship with, through creating my curriculum, I had to form a relationship with the parents, a tight relationship, saying that I love their student, they love me, and I can talk about these things and they're safe with me. It had to go, I had to have these real talks with parents that they're going to defend me if something happens, you know? And I know that you guys are in a broader place. New York is super huge. My community is not that big, but I had to start there. I had to really form relationships in order to form a curriculum that's accepted enough for me to be safe enough to talk about these conversations that are not safe to talk about everywhere. So I think that was my intention, was the relationship, the unity, and also not, I do incorporate Afro-Latinidad, but I also have to see who's in my room right now. Oh, I have a Vietnamese. Oh, I have somebody from Pakistan. So, oh, let's fuse you guys too. What relationships do I have? What relationships does Pakistan have with Latin America? Any at all? Let's research that. How about China with Latin America? How about Japan with Latin America? Like, I can't leave out. Once you bring in Afro-Latinidad, you start seeing all the gaps in the system and you get upset. I know you guys are educators. You're like, oh my Lord, this is a lot. And we're only a little bit, we're a handful, but all of this counts. And this is where I'm going with my curriculum.
Do you want to say anything, Scotty? Or add?
Y'all handle that for real, so I'm good.
I will say one comment, that idea of like teaching Spanish, but then really when you go and change it, I recommend this book called
You
it's
gotta
called
take the blur off.
Fugitive Pedagogy. Oh my God, I can't see it.
Yeah, you gotta take the
really
blur
good
off.
book. I'm gonna have to, sorry about that. But yeah, it's called Fugitive Pedagogy. And basically the idea is that folks for a long time teach Black history without necessarily saying they're going to do that. And I think what you did was a classic case of fugitive pedagogy. And I think that's an amazing comment. My last comment would be that last year when we did some Afro-Latino stuff in the classroom, some of my students, mostly Ecuadorian, Salvadorian, had a hard time trying to really appreciate it because they kind of just, because they, in some schools, there's a lot, Black history is taught a lot, and it depends on the school. Because some of when I taught some Latinx stories, some students like, man, I never had a teacher actually teach Latino stories in the classroom. It was always Black stories. I was like, okay, so it depends on what the classroom is, what the environment is. But I try to combine them, of course. But they were just saying that what I noticed was that this whole like choose an Afro-Latino, an important Afro-Latino figure and write in a one-page summary, sometimes it's not good enough, because what you really need when it comes to mestizos, like Salvadorian, they need some racial reconciliation. Like they need to like go back into like in native resistance, Afro-Indigenous history. Like they need to go back into that story and then really reconcile racially too with other Black folk, because obviously they're being bombarded with anti-Blackness. So choose one Afro-Latino figure. It's great. I've done it before. I've done it too. And I've always noticed in my pedagogy that that's not enough. Sometimes like we need to do more with providing more background and more racial reconciliation, explain racial hierarchies a little more, going back into anti-Blackness, and really try to see how they can connect with that story, with their, I'm Salvadorian, like I want to, expose Esmeralda, Ecuador, with some folks. And I've spoken to adults who work at museums and like, who are Ecuadorian. I said, do you know anything about Black history in Ecuador? No, I don't. With this interest, I was like, okay, so how do we, I feel like sometimes we need to do a lot of fronting with young folks. And I just want to give you a shout out with your fugitive pedagogy example. That was a beautiful thing to hear.
So we're getting a lot of questions about the resources, and so folks will receive a follow-up email if you need any resources about the curriculum or Afro-Latinidad. I think we answered the question about beyond representation, but we can combine them. With the curated material. So how do we go beyond representation, and how do we expand choices in curated materials? And you can take either or, but I know that for sure we talked a lot about moving beyond representation.
You know, I'll just reiterate. I think what Jennifer said earlier was a gem when she said sometimes you just have to challenge, you know, the system. You know, a lot of times the resources and materials aren't given or provided, but if there's enough interest within your school system or district or what have you, sometimes creating like a council of teachers or an advisory board or some type of, you know, something, you can pool resources together and actually you know, write a letter to the school board or write a letter to your principal or what have you, and request that certain resources become, you know, available or included in the curriculum. You know, it's a little bit difficult right now, and you know, considering how, you know, political everything is, especially in certain regions of the country, you know, particularly like, you know, in the deep South, where the sister Jennifer is at right now. But I think you know, with everything, you know, just using wisdom and seeing, you know, not so much looking at what you can't do, but looking at what can be done, you know, and work within that, and then seek to expand from there on.
Well, I mean, I agree with everything Yahusef said. And I think it's at this point in our history, like this idea of pedagogy and where we are going, I think, you know, I think it's really about obviously infiltrating the educational system, doing the curriculum work. I think at this point, though, obviously it's really trying to collaborate with other folks and trying to find funds and create a nationwide archive that can work as a repository for Afro-Latinx history, because you know, you need to work with folks that are skilled in metadata. We need to work with museums that can start collecting materials archived from communities. You know, we might have to create our own Afro-Latino Museum Association, Afro-Latinx. Come on, you know, because the way that we're excluded in terms of public humanities, I mean, that's kind of what the term is, right? Creating exhibits, creating online tours, creating public access, because in the cultural industry, we're ignored altogether. So then at the pedagogic front, you know, we just have to think big. We need to create a nationwide archive that's important. So obviously working with other Black digital humanities folks, Makiba Foster, for example, she's amazing. She created this archiving the Black web. So there are folks that are doing that kind of work, Black digital humanities, right? Jessica Marie Johnson is an amazing scholar in digital humanities that I always reference her work. And I did a summer thing where I was suggesting it's not just about cliometrics, it's not just quantifying how much enslaved folks were in the ship, but also creating moments of reconciliation and creating moments of kinship that Scotty was saying. And so it's really creating our way of doing this material work that in the digital humanities, it's being done by folks that don't look like anyone here, right? And so it's really about, at this point, trying to collaborate and really infiltrate the National Endowment for the Humanities, really getting in there and getting that money and really trying to figure out how to really work with folks and getting in there, and also doing teacher trainings that are summer-wide. For example, when I was at the Schomburg Center for Research and Culture, we did one called Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, Migration, and the Transformation of the African-American Community. They created a great book called In Motion, which I'm not going to show you, but we need funds to create summer-wide teacher trainings. We need to get in the archive repositories. It's a lot of work ahead of us, and that's where public humanities would come in, and just getting digital would be, and really infiltrating the museum. Shout out to Dr. Ariana Curtis, who right now they're doing all this amazing stuff at the African American Research at the in DC, and they're doing all this stuff. But yeah, getting more Afro-Latinx folks in these museums, and you know, it's a lot of work that's ahead of us, but there are people that are doing it and learning from them and learning how these institutions are doing teacher trainings, collecting materials, creating online metadata. All those things are really what's going to ensure our our survival for the future generations.
I don't want to Well, go ahead. Ed. You haven't talked. I want to
Just
move
real
to
quick.
Q&A.
So I think
But go ahead.
also there are ways that quite a few of us, there are some of us, right, that are not fortunate enough to be in states or in cities where this work is being supported locally necessarily, or there isn't like a huge amount of work being done. But a lot of us are in spaces where that's true, where like your local community has resources. And so Jennifer, like shout out to like you doing the invite to have your students do STEP with people that came into your school. Like, how can we get the people who are already doing the work in your communities onto the school site or in your classroom and get them to really do the work with you? And right, what we're all saying, right, is we're doing this all together because like there's not some top-down structure that's going to do this for us because we're Black, because we're brown, right? Like that is not gonna be the case. But what this does mean is that we have each other and we can hold each other down. And that in the communities where we do have access to these things, to get them on the school site and in the classroom is important. And then also, just to go back to like how to go beyond representation, like how are you teaching in your classrooms? How are students learning? And how has it traditionally been done in Afro-Latina communities? Like, can we go back to like practicing song making or dance making as oral like transmission of information, of knowledge? How can we introduce that into the classroom or introduce lots of other like deeply culturally rooted ways of knowing into the classroom to like really get it into folks' bones, whether they're a part of our Afro-Latina communities or beyond them.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback really quick. And someone asked about art, and I think right now, a lot of Afro-Latina artists are just holding it down right now in the museum world. You know, Fidele Bias, and I mean, I've used museum pieces, and people are like, "Oh my God, I didn't think about." So yeah, using multiple modalities, getting educators in the same room to think about. Someone mentioned Lucas Rivera. Like, there's a lot of stuff out there in terms of the art world, and really thinking multimodally in the classroom, really, and creating, like you said, that idea of creation and that kind of you know, it's really amazing what can be done, and as to like when educators get in the room and create some kind of support, you know, some kind of you know, mutually supporting pedagogic project where we can really learn from each other, and it's a beautiful thing. But yeah, like using multimodality is really where it's at, and creating new forms of knowledge. So shout out to that comment.
So I'm gonna turn it to a Q&A so that folks can have an opportunity to talk to the panelists, the wonderful panelists. So if you have any questions, or I can continue asking questions to the panelists. So if you have any questions, please. We have about 10 good minutes to discuss certain questions that you might have. If not, I will go into other questions. So have they asked any good questions on the chat that we can? Oh, did someone ask? I guess you can raise your hand. Let me ask the last question then. How can we offer more professional development opportunities to curriculum decision makers, including authors and developers? I know that Dr. Medina, you talked a little bit about it, but how can we get these decision makers in the same room to discuss, you know, Afro-Latinidad and its different, you know. No?
No, that's a great question, and we have to look into like the Board of Education and who's being employed as a curriculum designer and curriculum consultant, when you look at the resources that teachers are getting, going back to what Jennifer was saying earlier, when I taught at Newark, the Newark Board of Education, they're like, oh, there's all these resources. I'm like, I'm gonna have to do my own thing. Okay, let me just do it myself. And so that's the question. How do we get more, into the curriculum world, and who's being employed, and really try to have some sway with the Board of Educations to figure out how we can get in that conversation, because kind of what Jeffrey was saying, when we get all these teacher resources, they're very traditional for the nation state, right? They're not about the transnational or the kind of communal stories, the local stories that really matter, right? So yeah, it's a difficult thing, and that I will say that that needs to be delved in deeper, to really talk with folks, to really find professionals that can really help us understand how those folks get recruited and within the Board of Education. I think that's a great thing to really look into.
And this is my bad. In the Q&A, there's a whole bunch of questions. So let me read some of them, or one of them at least, or a couple of these. One is talking about the initiative, and would it be possible to distribute the link to some of the resources and education initiatives that have been mentioned in this presentation? The projects that panelists have led and being involved in.
Y'all gonna get an email because we doing all kinds of stuff. So y'all gonna get an email with links.
That's a great question. Yeah.
From the New York.
Add something. No, I did want to add something real quick. I'm really conflicted because as a Spanish teacher in the world language department here in the state, we don't have a state director. It's not important enough. They're taking world language out of our classrooms. I work in an independent school, so that's why I can have a job. So I'm conflicted between staying in the classroom and doing what I need to do, educating young folks, or running for Board of Education, because there's no representation there, and I need to go beyond representation and doing something. But if I get there, how much reproach will I get? How much pushback will I get? So that's where I'm at. I'm in a really bad situation. I feel like if I'm in another country than New York and Miami, where there is representation, it starts there. But if there's no representation at all, it's like I really don't know what to do. So I'm trying not to leave the classroom, but I'm conflicted to think I'm just gonna, when you want to grab your purse and just leave, I just want to grab my purse and get up there and just do something about it. But I don't know who's gonna back me up. So, but thank you for offering to support, because I'm definitely your friend now. Definitely.
There's been some questions. There's some questions about. I guess everyone was going to receive the resources through email. But is there a network of Black and Afro-Latinx educators and curriculum specialists? Something to create right now.
Yeah, there's not a centralized one that I am aware of that I think exists. Yeah, but there are so many of us, so perhaps some other projects for us.
Yeah, I think it starts here. It starts in conversations like this.
That's right. I do have a Facebook group called Incorporating Afro-Latino Culture in Spanish Classrooms. I'll put it in the link. And that's if you're a Spanish teacher, but anybody could really join that group and put in resources.
There's a question here about mestizaje, people versus indigenous people and what that means. How to address racism within our parents' households in a way that is not judgmental but firm. So I guess they're asking a couple of questions here about mestizaje, mestizos, and indigenous people and what it means.
Okay, this is not about to be a whole complete explanation. It's impossible to do so the amount of time that we have. But mestizaje is really about mixture. Like that is what it is, right? And so the like casta system that existed throughout Latin America placed different kinds of mixtures of different peoples racially in different positions socially in terms of power, and put alongside them, right, like the physical attributes that are supposed to be apparent that put people in different spaces. So what we mean today by mestizo, right, is the sort of like tepidly brown, right, like Latino that is positioned as the only Latinos who exist, right? And so if you think of the stereotypical Latino, like that is mestizo. And it has a whole lot else to do, but that is at its base what it is. And then indigeneity is really about having a cultural, deep relationship with the land, water, and air that exists in a specific area, and having traditions that are long lasting around that specifically rooted land, water, and air. And so indigenous people exist across the world, but that is not, it's not like necessarily a racial category. It's like a cultural like practice and positionality. Yeah.
And then lastly, I think this question is a good one too, because it deals with the question about New York curriculum versus like Jennifer, how you doing it in Alabama, and is what. Let me just read it. She says, how can we implement or incentivize more awareness through K-12 programs or AP classes through STEM to illustrate our contribution through time? Will this come from social economic programs, from education nonprofit, or individuals' intentions and legacy? And we have about a minute.
That definitely
Any
depends
thoughts?
on where you live. That's for sure. Where you can find your resources. So I have to get my resources from New York and Florida and Chicago. So you need to be active with joining groups, form groups, teacher groups, curriculum groups, because there's not one right answer for that. Everybody has like a different path to incorporating Afro-Latinx into the curriculum.
Right. Some people use literature. Some people, like I've taught, Latino Caribbean studies, and I use, for example, a lot of us get really creative. Like, again, we follow some artists on Instagram. Some of us are really big on Elizabeth Acevedo's work, Clap When You Land. Big hit in my classrooms, whether that's college or high school. Clap When You Land, right? Elizabeth Acevedo, just as a writer in general, is amazing. So literature is really, again, a lot of Afro-Dominican educators and artists are really holding it down in the last 20, since ever, but especially in the last 20 something years, and, really kind of going out there and really safeguarding this this movement for us, and really looking at other resources like art, really being active in the art world and the literature world, and the academic world, because as in the academic world, if you read the Afro-Latino Reader, those first 2 chapters really goes into Juan Garrido, the colonizer who came with Hernan Cortés, right? You really you have to do a lot of your own research, a lot of your own learning. And so really delving into the academic, the literature, the art world, really kind of taking that time to really inform yourself, because again, we're lacking a lot of resources. We're lacking a lot of centralized repertoires of knowledge that needs to be digitized and shared and made public for everyone. But yeah, I think that really, that's what I do. I go into like literature, I go into art, I go into like excuse my colloquialism, who's popping right now, who's doing these, have they read the wonder, Oscar Wilde, like who's really out there doing this kind of this work, and looking into older textbook, really look down these Mean Street, P.D. Thomas, really don't reading those classics, right? Really informing yourself of you know, who were the activists of the 70s and 80s and in our recent times. So it's a lot of work that it shouldn't just be experts. It's just like we should all know these things, but it really is about self-informing yourself and trying to really put that into a pedagogic process.
Thank you for that, William. And thank you again to all the panelists. Thank you everyone for joining us. This was a phenomenal discussion. We hope to have more. Please stay tuned for the email that we'll be sending out with the recording, as well as a list of some of the resources that were mentioned in today's conversation. And also, please tune into our next event, a conversation with Mayra Santos Febres, author, and Vanessa Perez Rosario, translator of the award-winning poetry collection Boat People by Cardboard House Press. They will discuss the inspiration for the book and the themes of immigration and belonging that are explored in the book. So please join us. That conversation will be next Tuesday, October 10th at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. And if you haven't, please register on the afro-latinoforum.org website to get our newsletters and any updates that we have. Again, thank you to all the panelists, and thank you everyone. Bendiciones.
Gracias a todos.
Igual, igual.
Gracias.
Cuídense. Take care.